Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of today's reading, then we examine a single relevant question that passage points us to. Today I'm joined by Dylan Wilkin, and we're looking at a passage from Exodus chapter 12. I want to talk about the connection between blessing and repentance. So God revealed to Moses the final plague would result in Pharaoh not only releasing Israel, but literally he would drive them or want them to go out of the land. Chapter 11, verse 1 says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, I will strike Pharaoh in the land of Egypt with one more blow. After that, Pharaoh will let you leave this country. In fact, he will be so eager to get rid of you that he will force you all to leave." So when the 10th and final plague struck, it was a terrible blow to Egypt. We get the details of this plague briefly and matter-of-factly. It says the firstborn of Egypt, of every Egyptian family died, from the firstborn of Pharaoh to the firstborn of the prisoner in the dungeon. So this is kind of a way of indicating the social spectrum of Egypt, with Pharaoh being at the top and the prisoners being at the bottom. Every single part of the social class in Egypt was affected by this plague. The firstborn of the livestock were killed, and this tragedy struck at midnight. So there's this great wailing in the middle of the night as families are discovering the death of their oldest sons. And if you can imagine, like the picture this is painting, this horror, almost a horror movie, as these screams suddenly pierce the night and they wail across the land. There's not a single house, it says in verse 30, that someone had not died. And true to the prophecy of chapter 11, Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron in the middle of the night. So he didn't wait. This is how desperate they are. He didn't wait till morning. He calls for them in the middle of the night, told them to get their people, all their families, all their livestock, and leave immediately. And we don't see the Israelites, being arrogant about leaving, but they're scrambling. It's all of a sudden, what do we do? They're trying to pack bread dough that's been set out for the following day that doesn't have any yeast added to it yet. We see that the people had obeyed Moses' instruction in verse 2 of chapter 11 to borrow silver and gold from the Egyptians. So when they were ordered to leave in haste, they took with them the wealth of Egypt. And if you go back to verse 30, if you look at verse 36, it says they stripped the Egyptians of their wealth. But there's this request by Pharaoh that seems odd, and it's almost out of place. In chapter 12, verse 32, it says, take your flocks and herds, as you said, and be gone. Go, but bless me as you leave. It seems kind of weird that suddenly Pharaoh is asking Moses to bless him as he leaves. There were other times you can find Pharaoh had requested Moses pray for him or to ask that a plague would be ended. You see that in chapter 8, verse 8, and then verse 28, chapter 9, verse 28, chapter 10, verse 17. And up until this point, Moses had always done so, even though it was clear at times that Pharaoh's motives weren't exactly right. They were selfish. And it seems ironic that when Israel, Jacob's family, first entered Egypt during the days of Joseph, Jacob blessed Pharaoh not once, but twice. Now, this is a different Pharaoh at this point, okay? But Genesis 47:7 says, then Joseph brought in his father Jacob and presented him to Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Then in verse 10, it says, then Jacob blessed Pharaoh again before leaving his court. And when we look at closely Pharaoh's his request for a blessing, there's a couple of things we'll find. It's possible that Pharaoh was just wanting the plague to cease. But verse 29 and 30 indicate that the plague had already stopped. Like once they're dead, they're dead. And when it's just the firstborn, it's just the firstborn. Now, it could continue if more firstborns were born. It could have continued. Maybe that's what he was wanting. Pharaoh might have feared that more death was going to follow. I don't know. It's also possible that Pharaoh might have been asking for some payback for releasing Israel, some quid pro quo, if you will. Like if I'm going to let you go, but in response, I want you to bless me. The thing is, though, it was not a blessing that was based on repentance. His future actions of pursuing Israel after they left, either with the intent of killing them or bringing them back to Egypt, indicate that he had not had a change of heart. So it was not a, I'm sorry, I'm changing, I'm following your God, please bless me. He's just wanting a blessing. And so he's still resisting God, and the scripture has indicated multiple times that his heart was hardened and he was stubborn against God. There is no record. We don't know. And in the other cases, Moses did pray, but there is no record that Moses blessed Pharaoh as they left that night. I would say there are no blessings without repentance. Pharaoh's motives for asking for a blessing can be derived, from the context. I would say this request was about Pharaoh, not about the people. He wasn't concerned about his country. He wasn't concerned about the people of Israel. He was only concerned about himself. He's like, bless me. And I think self-centered focus is another symptom of Pharaoh's pride and his hard heart that we can see here. He's just asking for things for himself. So, Dylan, we live in a culture that would use #blessed a lot. Mm-hmm. People use that tag on social media like it's a mark of humility. Like, hey, I've done something to receive this. Mm-hmm. But do you think that captures what it means to be blessed by God when you use #blessed?
It depends on where you're coming from. I think, in the context of general culture and people, no. Genuine humility is recognizing that all good things come from God and acknowledging his sovereignty in both blessings and trials. False humility, on the other hand, can use #blessed to mask pride or to seek validation and attention from others, right? If I get a new car, I'm going to be like #blessed. Like, okay, there's pieces of that that's beneficial to me. But is that, I don't know. I don't know. True blessings from God entail far more than just outward success or happiness. They include spiritual growth, peace in difficult situations, trials, relationships, and the presence of God in our lives. I think using #blessed without acknowledging the deeper aspects kind of trivialize the concept of truly being blessed by God.
Why do people think that they can be blessed or deserve to be blessed selfishly, even if they haven't repented or changed their ways?
One of the ways is by misunderstanding the nature of God's blessings, where they come from, viewing them solely in terms of material prosperity and personal happiness, rather than the things like spiritual growth, relationship with God, and just aligning with his will. I think also people cherry pick Bible verses to emphasize God's generosity and love, while also ignoring passages that call for repentance, obedience, and a humble heart.
Are things like money, wealth, possessions, good circumstances, are they the same thing as being blessed by God? Are they always blessings from God?
From a biblical perspective, while God can bless people with material wealth and prosperity, his blessings aren't limited to it. So, there are times where you see that, even with Job, for instance, right? God allowed everything to be basically stripped from Job, and then he returned it more. And so he blessed Job with material things and wealth and family and livestock and those things like that. I think the problem is when you don't recognize the other pieces of it. It's not limited to external markers. You have relationship with him, and with spiritual growth, obedience, and experiencing his presence and peace. Those are all blessings that we get to have as Christians as well.
Is there a lesson we can learn here? Is there something about our own heart that maybe people could apply from Pharaoh's response?
Yeah, I think overall we can focus on, are we being truly humble? Would just do a self-examination. That's the first step, I think, to really get anything. And just recognizing that true blessings come from a surrendered heart and a willingness to align with God's will, but also just trusting and being obedient to God, knowing that submitting to him is how you gain those blessings. You don't just expect a blessing selfishly without doing something on your part to receive that.
Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us tomorrow as we continue our conversation from the book of Exodus.